August 18, 1991. In a country spanning 11 time zones, controlling the world's largest nuclear arsenal, and home to nearly 300 million people, 8 men gather in secret. They are about to attempt something that seems impossible, seizing control of the Soviet Union in a single night. Within 72 hours, their actions will not save the empire they love, but destroy it forever. This is the story of the coup that killed a superpower. This is Blueprint. The Soviet Union in August 1991 is dying, though many refuse to see it. Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Communist Party, has spent 6 years trying to reform the system, opening windows in a house that many believe should have remained sealed. The economy is collapsing. Store shelves stand empty. In the previous year alone, Soviet GNP has declined by 4%. Inflation is approaching 300%. Lines for basic goods stretch for blocks. The government prints rubles with abandon, but there is nothing to buy. More dangerous than economic collapse is the centrifugal force tearing at the empire's edges. Lithuania declared independence in March 1990. Latvia and Estonia are moving toward their own declarations. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Moldova, Ukraine, the list of republics seeking exit grows longer. On June the 12th, 1991, just 2 months earlier, Boris Yeltsin was elected president of the Russian Republic with 57% of the vote, creating a rival power center within the Soviet state itself. For the first time in Soviet history, a leader derives legitimacy not from the party, but from popular vote. Gorbachev has negotiated a new union treaty designed to transform the USSR from a centralized empire into a voluntary federation. It grants significant autonomy to the republics while preserving some form of union. 9 republics have agreed to sign. The ceremony is scheduled for August 20th. For hardliners in the Communist Party, the KGB, and the military, this treaty represents the final betrayal, the moment when Gorbachev will formally dissolve the state they have spent their lives serving. 8 men decide they must act. They call themselves the State Committee on the State of Emergency, though history will know them as the Gang of 8. Gennady Yanayev, Vice President of the Soviet Union, 54 years old, a career apparatchik who rose through the Communist Youth League and the trade unions. He drinks heavily and his hands shake even when sober. Valentin Pavlov, Prime Minister, 53 years old, an economist who believes the West is conducting economic warfare against the USSR, who once claimed without evidence that Western banks were conspiring to destabilize the ruble. Dmitry Yazov, Minister of Defense, 67 years old, a World War II veteran who fought at Leningrad, who rose to become the last Marshal of the Soviet Union. Vladimir Khrushchev, Chairman of the KGB, 67 years old, a paranoid true believer who sees CIA conspiracies everywhere, who has spent 42 years in intelligence work. Boris Pugo, Minister of Internal Affairs, 54 years old, responsible for the nation's police forces, a Latvian by birth who ordered troops to storm the Vilnius television tower in January, leaving 14 civilians dead. Oleg Baklanov, first Deputy Chairman of the Defense Council, 68 years old, overseer of the Soviet military-industrial complex. Vasily Starodubtsev, a collective farm chairman representing the agricultural establishment. Alexander Tizyakov, president of the Association of State Enterprises, representing Soviet industry. These are not young firebrands or revolutionary radicals. They are old men, products of the system, who have watched their world crumble and decided that Gorbachev's reforms must be stopped. They are conservatives in the truest sense. They wish to conserve what is being lost. On August 4th, Gorbachev leaves Moscow for his vacation compound at Foros on the Crimean coast. The Gadasha sits on a cliff overlooking the Black Sea, a beautiful prison as it will turn out. He brings his wife Raisa, his daughter Irina, her husband, and their 2 granddaughters. He plans to rest before returning to Moscow to sign the new Union Treaty. The conspirators finalize their plans. They will isolate Gorbachev, declare a state of emergency, suspend democratic reforms, reassert central control. They believe the people will accept this. They remember 1956 in Hungary, 1968 in Czechoslovakia. They remember that tanks work. August 18th, 4:30 p.m. A delegation arrives at Foros unannounced. General Valentin Varenikov, commander of Soviet ground forces, Oleg Shenin, a Communist Party secretary, Oleg Beklanov, General Yuri Plekhanov, chief of the 9th Directorate of the KGB, personally responsible for protecting Soviet leaders. They come to Gorbachev's dacha, demanding he either declare a state of emergency himself or resign and transfer power to Yanayev. Gorbachev refuses. The confrontation lasts hours. He is 60 years old, isolated on a cliff with his family, surrounded by men with guns. His phone lines have been cut. His security detail answers to Plekhanov, who is part of the conspiracy. Gorbachev tells them their plan is irresponsible adventurism that will fail. They tell him the country is collapsing and he is to blame. The delegation leaves without his consent. They will proceed anyway. At Foros, the communication blackout continues. Gorbachev and his family are prisoners, though no one uses that word. Guards surround the compound. The Black Sea glitters in the summer sun. Inside, Gorbachev paces. He has a small Sony radio and a dictaphone. He begins recording his thoughts, his version of events, in case he does not survive. In Moscow, the machinery of the coup begins to move. August 18th, 11 p.m. Emergency meeting at a KGB guest house. The conspirators gather. Yazov brings military commanders. Khrushchev's KGB officers are ready. They discuss logistics, troop movements, media management. Bottles of vodka appear. Some drink heavily. The atmosphere combines nervous tension with bureaucratic routine, as if they are planning a party congress rather than a coup d'etat. They issue Decree Number 1, establishing the State Committee on the State of Emergency. Yanayev, with his trembling hands, will serve as acting president. They suspend political parties and independent media. They impose a curfew. They ban demonstrations. All constitutional changes are frozen. The decree is dated August 19th. Orders go out to military commanders. The Taman Guards Division and Kantemirov Tank Division will enter Moscow. KGB Special Forces will secure key facilities. The Alpha and Wimpel groups, elite units trained for the most sensitive operations, receive their instructions. Paratroops from the Tula and Ryazan divisions will deploy as backup. Tens of thousands of soldiers begin moving in the darkness. August 19th, 6 a.m. Moscow wakes to find tanks in its streets. The first reports are confused. Armored personnel carriers rumble past sleeping apartment blocks. T-72 and T-80 tanks take positions at key intersections. Soldiers in full combat gear, many of them young conscripts who were given orders hours earlier. Man checkpoints. They do not know exactly what they are doing or why. Officers tell them they are preventing civil war, protecting the motherland. 7 a.m. Soviet television abandons its regular programming. Instead, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake plays on loop, the traditional signal that something has gone terribly wrong at the top of Soviet power. Between ballet performances, announcers read the decree establishing the State Committee on the State of Emergency. Gorbachev, they claim, is ill and unable to perform his duties. Yanayev has assumed presidential powers. A state of emergency is in effect for 6 months. All opposition will be suppressed. The conspirators have miscalculated in multiple ways, but their first mistake is assuming the world of 1991 operates like the world of 1968. Information moves differently now. Within hours, CNN broadcasts images of Soviet tanks to a global audience. BBC World Service Radio, Voice of America, Radio Liberty all tell their Russian-speaking listeners what is happening. Fax machines in Moscow offices chatter with bulletins from abroad. The isolation the conspirators hoped to impose is already broken. 8 a.m. Boris Yeltsin is at his dacha outside Moscow when he learns of the coup. He is 59 years old, a massive man with white hair and a reputation for drinking and political courage in roughly equal measure. He was Boris Yeltsin, who defied the party apparatus, who quit the Politburo in protest, who was elected president of Russia on a democratic platform. He is the conspirators' primary target beyond Gorbachev, and they have made a fatal error. They have not arrested him. Yeltsin races toward Moscow, his motorcade moving fast through the countryside. His security detail is small. If the conspirators have ordered his arrest, a few soldiers at a checkpoint could end his role in history. No one stops him. The orders are either not given or not followed. By mid-morning, Yeltsin reaches the Russian White House, a massive white marble building on the Moscow River that serves as the parliament of the Russian Republic. The White House becomes the center of resistance. Yeltsin's staff begins working phones, calling military commanders, calling foreign leaders, calling anyone who might help. They draft a statement declaring the coup illegal. Russian Vice President Alexander Rotskoy, a decorated Air Force pilot, puts on his flight jacket covered in medals and stands ready. Ruslan Khasbulatov, Speaker of the Russian Parliament, begins organizing parliamentary resistance. 10 a.m. The conspirators hold a press conference at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is a disaster. The world watches on television as Yanayev, the supposed new leader of the Soviet Union, sits at a long table with other conspirators. His hands shake visibly. Someone asks where Gorbachev is. Yanayev claims he is resting, tired, unwell, but fine. His eyes shift. Sweat beads on his forehead. When a journalist asks if he understands he has carried out a coup d'etat, Yanayev's response is incoherent. He looks like a man who has already lost his nerve. Pavlov appears drunk or medicated. Khrushchev speaks in KGB generalities about threats and stability. These are not strong leaders projecting authority. They are nervous bureaucrats who have overreached. The press conference broadcasts their weakness to the world. While the conspirators stumble through their performance, Yeltsin acts. At 12 p.m., he walks out of the White House into the street where tanks from the Taman division have taken position. He climbs onto tank number 110, a T-72 commanded by Major Sergei Yevdokimov. Yeltsin is a big man, and he struggles onto the armor in his suit, but he makes it. Standing on the tank, towering over the crowd gathering around him, he reads the statement his staff has prepared. Citizens of Russia, on the night of August 18th to 19th, 1991, the legally elected president of the country was removed from power. We are dealing with a rightist, reactionary, anti-constitutional coup d'etat. We declare all decisions and decrees of this committee to be illegal. We demand the immediate convocation of an extraordinary Congress of People's Deputies of the USSR. We are absolutely sure that our compatriots will not permit the tyranny and lawlessness of the putschists. Cameras capture everything. The image of Yeltsin on the tank spreads instantly. Television, newspapers, magazines around the world. It becomes the iconic image of the resistance, the picture that will define these 3 days. The symbolism is perfect. The democratically elected leader standing on the military hardware of the dictatorship, the old Soviet tank transformed into a platform for freedom. The soldiers manning the tanks face an impossible choice. They have orders to secure the city, but they have not been ordered to fire on civilians. The crowd around Yeltsin grows. People bring food and flowers to the soldiers. They talk to them. These young conscripts from Ukraine, Belarus, Central Asia, they ask them, will you shoot your own people? Do you know what you are doing? Major Yevdokimov, whose tank Yeltsin climbed, makes a decision. He will not follow orders to storm the White House if they come. Other tank commanders reach the same conclusion. Some pull back to defensive positions. Others simply wait, paralyzed between competing loyalties. By afternoon, Moscow is a city divided into zones of control. The conspirators hold the television stations, the communication centers, the government buildings, but they do not control the streets, and they do not control the White House. More importantly, they do not control the narrative. Throughout August 19th, crowds gather at the White House. A few thousand at first, then tens of thousands. They build barricades from construction materials, trolley buses, street debris. Students, workers, pensioners, veterans, intellectuals, the human cross-section of Moscow arrives to defend the White House. Some come out of commitment to democracy. Others come because they hate the Communist Party. Many come simply because they refuse to return to the past. Viktor Tsoi, the rock star, died in a car crash just 1 year earlier, but his music plays from portable radios. We are waiting for changes, the crowd sings. Alexander Solzhenitsyn's books, banned for decades, openly discussed for only a few years, are passed around. Mstislav Rostropovich, the cellist who was exiled in 1974, returns to Moscow and comes to the White House with his cello. He plays for the defenders. The absurdity and beauty of the moment. A world-renowned classical musician playing Bach outside a besieged parliament building captures something essential about what is happening. Inside the White House, Yeltsin and his team work constantly. They need the military to defect from the conspirators. They call generals, colonels, majors, anyone with command authority. Some refuse to take sides. Some support the coup, but some begin to waver. General Pavel Grachev, commander of Soviet airborne forces, tells Yeltsin he will not attack the White House. General Yevgeny Shaposhnikov, commander of the Soviet Air Force, declares his opposition to the coup. These defections are crucial. Without military support, the conspirators cannot use force without triggering a bloodbath. The KGB's Alpha group receives orders to storm the White House that night. Alpha is the Soviet Union's most elite special forces unit, trained for hostage rescue, counter-terrorism, the most difficult operations. 20 to 30 Alpha operators could seize the building, but casualties would be enormous. The commander, General Viktor Karpukhin, goes personally to assess the White House defenses. He sees the barricades, the crowds, the civilians who will not leave. He sees that women and children are among the defenders. He sees that any assault will mean killing hundreds of people on live television. Karpukhin returns and tells his superiors that Alpha will not attack. His officers agree. They are prepared to die for their country, but not to kill their countrymen for a group of panicked bureaucrats. The KGB's most powerful weapon refuses to fire. Night falls on August 19th. The city is tense. No one knows what will happen in the darkness. The crowd at the White House grows to perhaps 50,000 people. They light bonfires in barrels. They stand watch. They expect an attack. Around 11 p.m., the attack begins, but not where expected. At the Garden Ring Road near the US Embassy, an armored personnel carrier column tries to force its way through a barricade. Defenders have placed trolleybuses across the street. Civilians surround the vehicles. Dmitry Komar, 23 years old, an Afghan war veteran, climbs onto one of the APCS. Soldiers inside panic. The vehicle lurches forward. Vladimir Usov, 37 years old, and Ilya Krychevsky, 28 years old, are in the crowd. The APC turns sharply. Shots are fired. In the confusion and darkness, it is never clear who shoots first or why. When the chaos ends, 3 young men are dead. Komar is shot in the head. Usov is shot in the back. Krychevsky is killed instantly. Their bodies are carried to the White House. Blood stains the pavement of the Garden Ring. They are the only deaths of the 3-day coup, and they change everything. The abstraction of political conflict has become real. 3 men are dead, killed by soldiers following orders from the conspirators. The price of the coup is written in blood on Moscow streets. News of the deaths spreads through the White House. Yeltsin is informed. The crowd outside becomes more determined. If the conspirators thought violence would intimidate the resistance, they are wrong. The deaths create martyrs, and martyrs strengthen resolve. August 20th dawns gray and uncertain. The conspirators meet again. Their coup is failing, and they know it. The military is fragmenting. Key commanders have defected. The international community has condemned them. The British government has frozen Soviet assets. The American president, George H.W. Bush, has refused to recognize their authority. Western banks have suspended transactions. The republics are declaring support for Yeltsin and Gorbachev. More damaging than foreign pressure is the domestic failure. They control the television stations, but people are getting information anyway. They have tanks in the streets, but the tanks are not moving. They have issued decrees, but no one is following them. The coup is collapsing, not with dramatic resistance, but with mass non-compliance. Yezhov, the Minister of Defense, realizes the game is over. He orders the troops to withdraw from Moscow. The Taman division begins pulling back. Tanks rumble out of the city. Soldiers who spent 2 nights wondering what they were doing return to their bases. Some defenders of the White House throw flowers at the departing tanks. Others simply watch them go, exhausted and relieved. Khrushchev tries one final gambit. He flies to Foros to negotiate with Gorbachev, perhaps hoping to extract some compromise that will save him. Gorbachev refuses to see him. The General Secretary of the Communist Party, still technically in power despite 3 days of imprisonment, will not grant his jailer an audience. In Moscow, the conspirators realize they must flee or surrender. Pugo, the interior minister, returns to his apartment. On August 21st, he and his wife are found dead, an apparent murder-suicide. Some reports suggest he shot his wife and then himself. Others claim she shot him and then killed herself. The truth dies with them in a Moscow apartment, one final Soviet mystery. The others are arrested over the following days. Yanayev with his shaking hands, Pavlov, the economist, Yazov, the marshal, Khrushchev, the spy master. They are taken into custody, charged with treason, held in the same prisons where they once sent others. None of them will ever hold power again. August 21st evening. A plane carrying Russian officials lands at Foros. Alexander Rutskoy, the vice president in his pilot's jacket, leads the delegation. They come to liberate Gorbachev. When they arrive at the compound, they find him with his family, tired but unharmed. His communication blackout has ended. He has been listening to the BBC and Voice of America on his Sony radio, learning what happened in Moscow while he was held captive. The delegation expects Gorbachev to be grateful, to thank Russia and Yeltsin for saving him. Instead, Gorbachev is irritable, defensive, still thinking in terms of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party. He does not yet understand that the country he left 4 days earlier no longer exists. August 22nd, 2 a.m. Gorbachev's plane lands in Moscow. He has been General Secretary of the Communist Party since March 1985. He has won the Nobel Peace Prize. He has transformed the Soviet Union with glasnost and perestroika. He has ended the Cold War. But the man who returns to Moscow is not the man who left. Gorbachev goes immediately to the White House to thank the defenders. He gives a press conference. He speaks about the Communist Party, about reform, about preserving the Union. His words sound disconnected from reality. Russia has saved him, but he thanks the Soviet Union. The Communist Party participated in a coup against him, but he defends the party. He seems not to grasp what has changed. Yeltsin understands. On August 23rd, the Russian parliament convenes in emergency session. Gorbachev attends, sitting next to Yeltsin. The session is televised. The world watches as Yeltsin, the Russian president, humiliates Gorbachev, the Soviet president, on live television. Yeltsin hands Gorbachev a document. It is the minutes of the August 19th cabinet meeting where Gorbachev's own government supported the coup. He forces Gorbachev to read it aloud. Then Yeltsin pulls out another document. It is a decree suspending the activities of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union on Russian territory. He signs it while Gorbachev sits beside him, powerless to object. The party that has ruled Russia since 1917, that killed millions, that built an empire, that survived Civil War and World War and Cold War, that party is suspended with a signature on live television. The symbolism is deliberate and devastating. Yeltsin is demonstrating that Russia is now sovereign, that the Soviet Union is now subordinate, that Gorbachev is now dependent on Yeltsin's goodwill. The coup failed, but Gorbachev has not been restored to power. He has been rescued into irrelevance. The republics move quickly. Ukraine's parliament declares independence on August 24th. Belarus follows. Moldova. Central Asian republics that showed little enthusiasm for independence suddenly rush toward the exit. The August Coup, meant to preserve the Union, has triggered its total disintegration. The new Union Treaty, scheduled to be signed on August 20th, is now meaningless. No one wants to join a union that just attempted a coup against itself. The Soviet Union, which survived revolution, civil war, collectivization, purges, the Great Patriotic War, the Cold War, and decades of stagnation, cannot survive 3 days in August. September, October, November pass in a kind of dreamlike dissolution. Gorbachev still holds the title of Soviet president, but he presides over a phantom state. The republics are leaving. The institutions are fragmenting. The Communist Party, illegal in Russia, is collapsing everywhere. The KGB is being reformed and renamed. The military is being divided among new nations. On December 8th, Yeltsin meets with the leaders of Ukraine and Belarus at a hunting lodge in the Belavezha forest. They sign an agreement declaring that the Soviet Union has ceased to exist and establishing the Commonwealth of independent states in its place. They do not ask Gorbachev's permission. They simply inform him afterward. Gorbachev is furious, but he can do nothing. He threatens not to recognize the agreement. He claims only the Soviet Congress can dissolve the Union. But Russia controls the Kremlin now. Russia controls the nuclear codes. Russia controls the apparatus of state. Gorbachev's protests are the words of a man shouting at a wave. December 25th, 1991. Christmas Day in the West. Just another Wednesday in officially atheist Moscow. Gorbachev pre-records his resignation speech. At 7 p.m. Moscow time, the speech airs on television. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, announces that he is ceasing his activities as president. He speaks for about 15 minutes, defending his policies, his reforms, his intentions. He notes the achievements, the end of the Cold War, the liberation of Eastern Europe, the beginning of democratic reforms. He notes the failures, the economic collapse, the inter-ethnic conflicts, the coup. When the speech ends, the Soviet flag is lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. The hammer and sickle, red banner of revolution and empire, comes down in the darkness of a Moscow winter evening. The Russian tricolor rises in its place. 74 years after the October Revolution, 69 years after the formation of the USSR, the Soviet Union ceases to exist. The nuclear briefcase, the Cheget that can launch 6,000 warheads, is transferred from Gorbachev to Yeltsin. The transfer happens in private, two men in a room, exchanging the power to end human civilization. Then Gorbachev leaves the Kremlin. He has no official car anymore. He has no office. He is 60 years old, unemployed, a former president of a country that no longer exists. What do we make of the 8 men who tried to stop this? They saw themselves as patriots trying to save their country. They were willing to use force, to suspend democracy, to turn tanks on civilians if necessary. They believed the alternative, the breakup of the Soviet Union, would be worse. Were they wrong? The 15 years following the Soviet collapse bring catastrophic economic depression to Russia and many former Soviet states. GDP falls by 50% in some years. Life expectancy drops. The population declines. Savings are wiped out by hyperinflation. State assets are stolen in rigged privatizations. Organized crime flourishes. Regional conflicts erupt in Chechnya, Nagorno-Karabakh, Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. Hundreds of thousands die in these wars. The conspirators predicted chaos, and chaos came, but they also wanted to preserve a system that killed tens of millions of its own citizens through collectivization, purges, the Gulag, and deliberate famines. They wanted to maintain an empire built on the subjugation of subject peoples who did not want to be subjects. They wanted to prevent the democratic reforms that, however imperfectly, gave people a voice in their governance for the first time in Russian history. The question haunts us. Did the coup's failure cause the Soviet collapse, or did the inevitable collapse cause the coup? If the 8 conspirators had succeeded, if they had arrested Yeltsin, if the troops had stormed the White House, if the resistance had been crushed, would the Soviet Union still exist? Or would it have collapsed anyway? Perhaps more violently, perhaps with civil war? We cannot know. History does not offer controlled experiments. We cannot rerun 1991 with different variables and compare outcomes. We know only what happened. 8 men tried to stop the dissolution of an empire, and their attempt accelerated it. The conspirators themselves met various fates. Pugo died on August 21st. The others were arrested and charged with treason. They spent time in prison, but the charges were eventually dropped in 1994 under a general amnesty. Yazov, the marshal, lived until 2020, dying at 95, insisting to the end that the coup was necessary. Khrushchev lived until 2007, unrepentant. Yanayev died in 2010. his hands presumably still shaking. Gorbachev lived in diminished circumstances. He started a foundation, gave speeches, wrote books. The West loved him for ending the Cold War. Russians blamed him for destroying their country. In 1996, he ran for president of Russia and received less than 1% of the vote. He lived to see Russia become an authoritarian state again, to see former KGB officers return to power, to see his reforms reversed. He died in August 2022, exactly 31 years and 1 week after the coup that ended his power. Yeltsin served as president of Russia until 1999, overseeing the chaotic transition to capitalism and democracy. His later years in office were marked by economic crisis, corruption scandals, and questions about his health. On New Year's Eve 1999, he resigned early, handing power to his chosen successor, Vladimir Putin, a former KGB officer. Yeltsin died in 2007. The three young men who died on the Garden Ring, Dmitry Komar, Vladimir Usov, and Ilya Kryshevsky, were declared heroes of the Soviet Union, receiving the honor from a country that ceased to exist 3 months later. Their deaths are commemorated by a small monument at the spot where they fell. Today, many Russians have never heard their names. What was it all for? The question applies to the coup, to the resistance, to the entire Soviet experiment. Millions died building socialism. Millions more died in the purges meant to perfect it. The empire stretched across 11 time zones, but could not feed its people. The ideology promised paradise, but delivered prison. The final attempt to save it lasted 72 hours and killed 3 people. The Soviet Union collapsed not with war or revolution, but with a failed coup, a broken economy, and a sense of exhaustion. People simply stopped believing. The soldiers would not fire. The tank commanders defected. The citizens built barricades. The republics declared independence. The whole vast structure, which seemed so permanent, so powerful, revealed itself to be fragile. What happens when empires die? They rarely die cleanly. The Soviet collapse created 15 new countries, but it also created frozen conflicts that still kill people today. It created opportunities for democracy, but also for oligarchy and corruption. It ended a totalitarian system, but created a vacuum that new authoritarians filled. The world became safer in some ways. The Cold War ended, nuclear Armageddon became less imminent, but it became more dangerous in others. Loose nukes, failed states, regional wars without superpower restraint. Did the coup fail because it was morally wrong or because it was tactically incompetent? Would better conspirators have succeeded? The 8 men were neither stupid nor cowardly. They had risen to the highest levels of Soviet power, but they were products of a system that valued loyalty over initiative, that punished independent thought, that selected for conformity. When the moment came to act decisively, they hesitated. When they needed to project strength, they appeared weak. When they required absolute commitment, they showed doubt. Contrast them with Yeltsin standing on the tank. That image of defiance, that moment of courage, that willingness to risk everything, it mattered. History is shaped by such moments more than we like to admit. If Yeltsin had stayed in his dacha, if he had fled Moscow, if he had not climbed onto tank number 110, would the resistance have coalesced? Possibly, but probably not as quickly, not as dramatically, not with such powerful symbolism. August 1991 reminds us that historical inevitability is a myth. The Soviet Union's collapse seems inevitable in retrospect, but it was not inevitable in that moment. The coup could have succeeded. Yeltsin could have been arrested. The military could have followed orders. The resistance could have been crushed. History could have turned differently with different decisions, different courage, different failures. What do we learn from empires that collapse? That they collapse faster than anyone expects, that they are stronger and more fragile than they appear, that their end surprises both their critics and their defenders. The Soviet Union seemed eternal until it vanished in months. Yugoslavia seemed stable until it exploded in war. These transformations happen with shocking speed once they begin. The final lesson is about the unpredictability of human will. The conspirators had tanks and troops and the apparatus of state power. The resistance had barricades and Yeltsin and the desire not to return to the past. The resistance won not because it was stronger, but because it was more committed, more willing to risk, more capable of inspiring loyalty. Power flowed to those willing to claim it. 72 hours in August, 8 conspirators, 3 martyrs, 1 failed coup, 1 collapsed superpower. 300 million people suddenly living in 15 new countries, navigating an uncertain future. The August Coup of 1991 did not save the Soviet Union. It killed it. The men who tried to prevent history instead accelerated it, becoming not the saviors they imagined, but the grave diggers they feared. And Moscow today? The city has changed beyond recognition. The Soviet symbols are gone from most places, though statues of Lenin remain here and there. Ghosts of an ideology few remember. The White House still stands on the Moscow River. A small memorial marks where 3 young men died defending it. Tourists rarely visit. Russians walk past without noticing. History fades. The question remains, was the Soviet collapse liberation or catastrophe? The answer depends on who you ask, where they live, what they lost or gained. The question has no single answer because historical events have no single meaning. They mean different things to different people, and those meanings shift with time and perspective. What we can say with certainty is this. In August 1991, 8 men tried to stop the future, and the future ran them over. An empire fell. The world changed. And the tank on which Yeltsin stood, tank number 110, was eventually moved to a museum where it sits today, a monument to the moment when ordinary people decided they had had enough.